Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the PolitiTeen podcast. As always, I'm your host, Ray Hennessy, and today we're joined with a show regular, Trex Jones. Trex Jones, how are you today?
I'm good. How about you?
I'm doing well. I can't complain. Now, as we can see, there's a lot going on in the country, a lot going on with the executive branch. But before we go into a couple things I want to talk about, let's just do a general survey. What's going on? What's been going on? What's been interesting?
I mean, it's Trump's term's very drastic. There's a lot of things going on. I mean, when we were looking at it, there's so much to look at, from USAID to the Doge Department, and it's a lot, and it's a very rapid change. It's a very rapid wanting to change things, and I think I forgot who it was that summarized it, but they said they're like the Silicon Valley people. They come in, they break a few things, and then they try to put it back together and make it better.
Yeah, and it's very interesting how this administration has been trying to conduct a lot of action. When thinking about this mission, I think a lot of this name, which I guess it's a little bit past its prime, Vivek Ramaswamy.
Yeah.
Back during the Republican primaries, Vivek Ramaswamy said he would run on a platform of executive action. That he believed that regardless of what happens to the legislature, besides it being slow and it being always a close call and the cause of a lot of problems and inaction, Vivek Ramaswamy basically ran on a platform of almost everything I do is doable with executive orders. And I think it plays into some of the appeal of this, which I don't think would have been appealing many years ago. This idea of the president just kind of taking charge and doing a lot of things and kind of trying to sidestep or, not have to utilize Congress, is the fact that obviously times change and people in the U.S. are almost looking for like the people's champion who could just get things done.
Yeah.
And almost like an FDR kind of thing where FDR said in his, I think it was second or third inaugural address, I always forget which one it was. He told the legislature directly to their faces, something along the lines of, if you do not give me power, I will take power and authority.
Yeah.
And I think it plays into this long tradition of, when people feel that something is very wrong with the country, people look to one man and one individual to just kind of take charge. But what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that's a true trend?
I mean, look at FDR. He was a very popular person, and the country was going through the Great Depression and needed somebody to take care of it. And they went with FDR, even though he was very, some would say, authoritarian on some of his decisions, or was going to undermine a lot of institutions. He was very democratically popular because he was getting things done. He was perceived to help the people and helping the people. And so that's kind of like what we see with these ideas of using executive order, because it's very nice. Like in a couple of classes I've been
when you say it's very nice, what do you mean by that?
It's very nice because in a couple of classes I've been talking about was like one teacher will say like this is hurting his legislative agenda for Trump. He'll be like, it's hurting this because he's not letting him get the funds, or it's go to the courts and get all this fighting. Another class though, you'll hear, well, it's good because his perception of getting things done is going to go up because he's issuing all these things. I mean, during Inauguration Day, what we saw was, I don't know what the final count was, executive orders, but it was 100 plus.
Yeah, I think it was over 100 executive orders.
Yeah.
Day one.
And then I think it was over 200 executive actions, which fall under executive orders. And those are things like your cabinet can carry out the laws. Bless you.
Thank you. Yeah, actually, this is interesting because I remember I was listening to a podcast. It was, I think it was the Lex Friedman podcast. And he was interviewing the host of Breaking Points. He was like a really well-read dude. I don't know. Are you familiar with him? Yeah. He's so well-read. Like, you name a book, he's read it. He knows it. And he was talking about the perception of like FDR and Hoover, the difference between the two. And what he said in the podcast was basically Hoover actually did do things. He didn't just sit there and do nothing. He had the Smoot-Hawley Act. He did I think some subsidization and stuff like that, but he didn't do enough. And the people didn't feel like he was doing anything. So the people became very, very unhappy with Hoover and basically voted him out with massive margins, and they brought in FDR. And what did FDR do? He did a lot of programs. He had his alphabet soup that his critics made fun of. And the truth of the matter was, when it comes to economic recovery, actually, his programs didn't help that much. Some even argue that his programs might have prolonged the Great Depression by a couple of years. Then he only got bailed out by World War II. But regardless of your interpretation, for the first couple of years of his programs, they really weren't doing anything. If there was to be an actual benefit, they would be coming later on. And the thing was that people felt that because FDR was implementing all these programs, because he was doing all these things, and the people saw it and at least felt it, even if the economy wasn't actually doing better, his approval ratings, FDR's, ended up going higher and higher and higher. So it is this kind of distinction between the perception of actual action and then actual action that's meaningful.
Yeah, and I mean, like, we talk about this in communication classes a lot. It's like, what's your perception? How are you perceived? There's this chart, and the name's not coming to me, but it's like known self, exterior self, unknown self. And it kind of applies to this because it's like, well, what's known about FDR? Like, what's his known self to the public eye? And it's like, well, he's a great guy. He gets a lot of things done. If you're the Supreme Court or the Congress, you're like, he's a horrible guy. He's scary. And then, like, but no, and that's kind of how that works. It's very interesting. Like, as a communications major, perception is very interesting to learn about, and kind of how people perceive their perception, and how people there's a couple ways to try to figure it out, and like lots of different terms, like how you perceive yourself, how people perceive yourself, how your friends perceive yourself, and kind of like you don't really know what your whole brand is, like how people look at you. And and with Trump, we get that, where we get a person that is coming in, he's like, hey, I'm gonna do all these things. And to some people, some voters, they're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. To some voters, they're like, this is scary. And to, I think, maybe people that are not really engaged, like reading up on everything, there's gonna be two sides of the coins where they're like, this guy is like getting a lot of things done. He's signing all these orders.
Hmm?
And then some are like, he's signing all these orders, but he said he was going to get inflation down by tomorrow. What is this all about? Like, come on.
Let's talk about those price of eggs, Trump.
I was very sad, man. I couldn't get eggs the other day. I was very sad.
Yeah, I remember you telling me about that.
I was bribing you with some eggs.
Yeah,
actually.
Well, it was actually really funny, though, because I remember you ordered eggs online, and you were like, how much? They're like dirt cheap.
They were like, I think it was $8.99. It was Costco order. It was
like a 24 pack. For 60, yeah, $8.99 for a 60 pack of eggs in this economy. Yeah, they were sold out. You better believe it. Yeah. I think the price of eggs are like $4.99 a carton or something like that. $4.99 a carton. I haven't bought eggs in a minute. I've been
no, dude, they're way. Well, I'm now this is Whole Foods. This is the
okay, yeah.
Too. Bye.
I'm not. I stopped eating eggs because the price increased. I'm a poor broke college student, so I switched my egg intake to just more liverwurst.
Yeah, my new egg intake is sausage. Like, I literally cook sausage like every morning.
It's rough out here. But yeah, definitely some hash browns and some Brunswick yogurts. It goes a long way. Anyways, let's talk about it. Let's talk about Trump for a second. Let's talk about his administration. When we talk about a lot of these executive actions, what he's doing, the many things that he's doing, aside from the fact that whether or not people are happy with it or they're pleased with it, a lot of people are concerned with the way that he's doing it. And some people are concerned about what people consider like the overreach of the executive branch, the overreach of Trump to all these other sectors of the government, and that some would even call it a constitutional crisis. I think it'd be a good idea to kind of analyze what exactly are the legal foundations, the legal theories that Trump is relying on to do many of his actions, and assess what are the realities to it. Is it a sound argument? And if it's a sound argument, would that create, or if it's not a sound argument, I should say, would that create a constitutional crisis? Because simply, if the legal foundations that Trump is using as an excuse for his actions, if they are sound and reasonable, that would follow that it is a constitutionally sound argument, and then it won't be a constitutional crisis. So it'd be interesting to go over. So first, I think we should talk about it. Unitary executive theory. What is it? Where did it come from? Who was the first president to really use it?
So when we're talking about unitary executive theory, my first introduction to this was with the movie called Vice, and
Dick Cheney.
Dick Cheney, and it was like the lawyer. He's like, Dick Cheney's like, "What do you think about our executive theory?" And he's like, "I really like it." And like, but then I was like, "But what is it?" And so, my first perception was it was like, well, in the movie, it's like you could do whatever you want, Mr. President. And I think there's probably people that want to push it, but in our discussion today, executive theory is the theory of if anything is done in the executive, that the executive has power to do so, and we'll define those powers through court cases and also kind of arguments in the Constitution and all the things. But the executive theory comes from the power in the vesting clause, which is the executive power shall be vested in the President of the United States of America. He shall hold his office during the terms of 4 years, and together with the Vice President chosen for the same term, be elected as follows. And this is in the Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution.
So just to clarify, the foundations of unitary executive theory are within the vesting clause of the Constitution.
Yeah.
And what it basically states is that the president, who is the head of the executive, the chief executive, basically is vested with sole and total executive power.
Yeah.
We mean that anything that falls within the branch of the executive, not spilling over into the other two branches, are solely within his purview.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And some people argue the take care clause is also part of that. That's in the same section.
Mm-hmm.
The take care clause is just as also he shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed and shall commission all the officers of the United States. That's just the other part of it. You see, like, kind of some people take that with it. Some people don't take that with the arguing it. But this idea also comes from sometimes some of the Federalist Papers. And what we saw was Hamilton said that in Federalist 70 that energy in the executive is a leading character in the definition of a good government. And that's kind of been some of the people like pointing at that and kind of saying this is what the founding fathers wanted, because they wanted energy in the executive. They wanted, people to be quick and do things and be able to be by themselves when they make a decision.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah.
Okay. So with that being understood, let's also talk about for a second when this theory kind of came about and what's the prevalence. So my understanding of it is that when it first became most famous was with the academic John Yoo. And John Yoo worked for the Bush administration. And the Bush administration was really the first administration to really say, as a clear doctrine, unitary executive theory. And this kind of spills over in several different ways, this very interesting interpretation of the Constitution, not just in terms of unitary executive theory, but also taking a side tangent a bit in the way the U.S. would conduct its business abroad. John Yoo is the same academic who created the infamous torture memos, which was basically this leaked set of memos that explained and defended the use of advanced interrogation tactics on foreign enemy nationals on foreign lands. Give an example of what that means: Guantanamo Bay, waterboarding, and all those messed up images that you can see online. Basically, those are permissible because those are just advanced interrogations, and because the Constitution's rights don't necessarily extend to foreign adversaries not on the soil of the United States. So this kind of, between those two doctrines, this guy is known for those two, which are contentious, to say the least. Anyways, going back now to the main theory of unitary executive theory, let's talk a bit about, for example, when it historically has been used.
So yeah, looking at this, one of the first cases that we've seen is during the Reagan administration, second term. In 1988, we had Morrison versus Olson, which was a Supreme Court case that held that the constitutionality of an independent counsel, and the case stemmed from a dispute between the Reagan administration and Congress over documents related to the EPA. And pretty much the end outcome of it was that the Supreme Court ruled that Congress could place limits on the presidential removal power of removing certain cabinet members or government.
Now, this is really interesting because this is one of the first major cases that came up that really discuss what exactly were the limitations in this respect to the executive theory or to executive power. And I think Morrison v. Olson is very interesting because this is known to be the case that was Scalia's great dissent, where out of the Supreme Court justice, it was an, I believe, 8-1 decision in favor of, I don't remember which one's Morrison and which one's Olson. I think Morrison was the special counsel and Olson was representing the executive branch. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that. But Scalia's great dissent was basically that the legislature couldn't just create this body, which does have this Scalia's concern with that case was that he was concerned that the legislature did not have the right to create a special investigative body that would, by its very nature, in order to carry out the investigation, have executive authority. And he argued that if they have executive authority, they must be beholden to the president, for he's the chief executive. And he said that this was a great concern, that basically the Supreme Court has permitted this to happen. Because the argument against it was, well, if you let the president have chief authority over this executive, over this special counsel, even if to the degree that there is executive action taking place, then basically, how can we trust any investigation to the president if they just have authority over the executive and they could just order them to not do things or order them to do things? Yeah. And Scalia's argument was that it really, that sucks. He basically was like, that sucks. But he said that everyone thinks that democracies or this republic's greatest cases are going to be the ones that you see coming from a mile away, the most obvious ones. But he said, no, the most dangerous Supreme Court cases the most dangerous cases that will be brought to the Supreme Court will not be the ones that everyone thinks are the actual risk. They are going to be the ones that are wolves in sheep's clothing. And those will be the ones that slowly kill this country. And he believed that Morrison v. Olson was one of them. And according to, I think, a more recent legal theory and legal academic debate, I think there's a lot more of a consensus, not to say that there's a clear consensus, but a lot more of a consensus with Scalia's view and hesitancy over the ruling than there was when it first came out, when a lot of legal scholars were actually in support of the Morrison v. Olson ruling. That being said, let's take a step back and let's look at historically kind of the legal precedent of it before unitary executive theory was really
conceptualized and brought in.
Formalized, conceptualized, right. Because there are examples here of basically not that the unitary executive theory was exercised outright, but kind of de facto exercised and were questioned without the actual theory in place. So the first example would be 1833 with the bank wars with Andrew Jackson. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Andrew Jackson vetoed the Second Bank of the United States and removed the Secretary of Treasury for not following his orders. And so what the argument was from Jackson, President Jackson, was he argued that since the executive power is vested in him alone, he has the authority to make that decision. And this will be later discussed, is talking about different agencies and how that works, because I'm not very well read on this, and I might have, make sure I don't mess this up, but a lot of different agencies have oversight from the president, and some of them don't have oversight, as the president can appoint a member there, but they can't remove them. And I think that was one of the things that happened under the Trump administration, and was raised questions about that regarding Cuomo with his that was the FBI, if I remember correctly.
Cuomo? Yeah. Cuomo's FBI.
Cuomo was a
Oh, you're talking about Andrew Cuomo. No, I'm thinking Comey.
I'm thinking Comey. Yeah. I'm like, that's the governor. I'm like, Cuomo's a governor and the brother. Yeah.
Right.
But yeah. And
the cleanest pair of brothers in politics.
Hey, just come on my show. We'll
talk it out.
We'll talk it out, man. Mom's calling you. Mom's calling you.
You can lift some weights on TV, and we could debate whether or not they're real.
True. And so then the next time we see this executive order kind of start building up, and not executive order, but unilateral or executive theory, is Abraham Lincoln in 1861.
Well, actually, I want to stop and go back for a second, because I think Andrew Jackson, there's a lot more to talk about with him, because he's a very interesting figure when it comes to executive theory. Because not only do we talk about the bank war and him just trying to use basically sole executive power to kind of remove the Secretary of Treasury for not following his orders. He's also known for the force bill in 1833 against the nullification crisis, where he basically said, if you don't comply to North Carolina, or yeah, I'm pretty sure it was North Carolina. It's like, I'll just send the military in and we're going to collect these taxes and we're going to make sure that you stay in the union and be beholden to the laws. And this was like the first ever massive show of force, not, to quell a rebellion, but to just, well, I guess this was a form of rebellion, but to tell a whole state basically, if you don't comply, I will make you comply with force, with extreme force if necessary. And even more than that, pushing forwards, I think one of the most fascinating cases that I always think of is the case of Worcester versus Georgia. And Worcester v. Georgia was a case in, 1832, where basically this man sued Georgia on behalf of the Cherokee Nation. This man was a white preacher who was trying to proselytize the Cherokees, but he was a defender of Cherokee sovereignty. And he basically argued that the Georgia criminal statute that prohibited non-Native Americans from being present on Native American lands without a license should be upkept, and that Georgia was saying, actually, it's not allowed. We should be allowing anyone to just go in there. And the results of this case would actually it was basically the result of this case would therefore lead sooner after to the Trail Tiers, the Cherokee Trail Tiers, which, as I say, I think that's part of the reason why, the Trail Tiers is a big reason why you don't talk about Jackson, because of a lot of the controversy that he has racially, the Native American populations. But I think in terms of analyzing him when it comes to the executive power, he's a very fascinating case study where it ended up going all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled one way. And he's known for his most famous dictum from this, which was basically in response to the in response to John Marshall in the court. Although it's believed that he might never have said this, he de facto behaved this way. He said, "John Marshall has made his decision. Now let him enforce it." Basically meaning that judiciary can say what they want. That's cool. But they don't have executive authority. Yeah. I do. And what good is a law? What good is a ruling if I'm not going to enforce it?
Well, yeah. And I mean, like, throughout my schooling in high school and college, I've had a lot of different professors with different opinions about like enforcement and like the Supreme Court powers, ranging from the Supreme Court should not have any powers. It only got powers through we took the same professor through lawyering or some lawyer, like what was his terms?
It was Marbury v. Madison.
Yeah, but he like always through lawyers like ways of wanting to get more power or something like that.
Yeah,
that was like his critique. But then like my high school debate coach, he would talk about like, yeah, I think like they should have a power. They have it. Like this is why they should have it. But their check on them is if they get out of hand is that you just go, well, then enforce it. Like, try me. Like, that's like the president is like saying, try me. Like, and that's kind of how that works.
And even before getting to that degree, to the presidency, there have been many times in history, I think during the Biden administration even, where there were certain laws. It's blanking right now what laws, but there were laws and many sheriffs across America said, oh, I'm just not going to tell my men to enforce it.
Yeah, I mean, and that's happened with local counties and local towns and all things. Like, and it's really interesting, this whole thing of being like, I'm just not going to enforce it. I mean, and that's been seen with attorney generals. I think in my home state, I'm trying to think of somebody that this guy, I'm trying to think of who it was, but they did enforce a bunch of different weed cases, like people smoking weed and getting caught and prosecuting it. And the reason they didn't do that was because of a bill was in the state house that was maybe going to legalize it, and didn't want to waste a bunch of resources on that. We saw with Roe v. Wade, once it was overturned, a bunch of attorney generals, I think this is also mine, she came out and goes, I am not going to enforce, Chris Mays, if I remember correctly, I'm not going to force abortion law on the people. And also Arizona's weird. We had a territory law that kicked into place. I don't think it was after Roe v. Wade, or it was because of Roe v. Wade. It was a trigger law. It was from like 1861.
Okay.
So like, it was like
Civil War times.
Yeah. Well, we weren't a state yet.
Yeah,
I wasn't like.
How do you guys have a trigger law for something that
it was a territorial law.
Oh, okay.
That was still like recognized by the federal government.
God, the law is so interesting.
It's like.
Well, do you know what it said?
I forgot what it said. I mean, it's pretty famous. Like, if you want to look it up really quickly as well. But it was pretty like like very strict. I would add abortion law, and then that's like. But yeah, no, it was crazy to me because like you hear about these trigger laws, and like at the time I think it was my freshman year of college. So I was like, what is everyone talking about these trigger laws? And then I was like, oh my gosh, I live in a state with a trigger law. And we had a few court cases locally, and I think there's a few judges that upheld the law, and then they got to the top and either got struck down. But yeah, it's crazy.
So yeah, okay, this is this is interesting.
Yeah, we should do an episode probably about trigger laws sometime because it's one of these, and like this one is like a whole case study to me because it's so crazy how before it even was a state, before the state even had a state constitution or a state legal system, and it was still governed under martial law from the federal government, like using marshals, it had this.
Interesting. So for people who don't know, it's called Howell's Code, and it was Arizona's first abortion law. It was passed in 1864, and it was a near total ban on abortion with a penalty of 2 to 5 years in prison for anyone who performed an abortion. The law only allowed abortions if it was necessary to save a pregnant woman's life, and it was created by William T. Howell, a New Yorker who moved to Arizona in 1863, and Arizona Supreme Court upheld the 1864 law when it came into place, ruling on a request from the state's former attorney general to restore it in the wake of the Supreme Court's 2020 decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. Wow, also 2022.
Yeah,
feels so long ago.
Oh my god. Yeah, but no, and like I wanted to read the decision. I have never read the decision because I kind of like brushed over it because I feel like it got switched or changed really quickly or became irrelevant as Attorney General Chris Mays just was like,
nah, not gonna enforce it.
I'm not gonna enforce a civil or post-Civil War law or like is it pre-Civil War?
1865 is when it ends.
65. Wow.
This is 1861. It was drafted up.
Yeah.
Right. 61 or 64? No, 64. So almost near the end.
Yeah, towards the end of it, she's like, I'm not gonna enforce that, and I was like, yeah, that's valid, you know?
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, like, going back to the idea of being like, yeah, I'm not gonna enforce something, is really popular. And still really popular. And I know the president is like, they can sometimes do that and they sometimes can't do that, as it's like their take clause or the take care clause was talked about earlier.
As per at least Constitution, they are supposed to uphold and take care of the law and the carrying out of the law and justice. The question is, they don't believe that is good justice or good law, then it becomes a question of, can the president do it? I think that in and of itself can create a very easy constitutional crisis, basically. But before we go into that,
what is a constitutional
crisis?
We
should talk exactly about that.
I hear it all the time. And
it's a constitutional crisis. Our country's going down the tubes.
And so when researching this, I mean, there's dozens of different definitions that vary slightly, drastically. But 538, I love them for political things, polling. And they had a political expert come in, or political scientists, come in and talk about there are 4 types of constitutional crisis. And one of them was the Constitution doesn't say what to do because it's very vague. So then it has to make decisions. And I understood this one. I was like, okay, fine. Like, it's very vague, and so you have to like figure stuff out. And to me, like, but that's I was later talking about it, and I was like, or like thinking about it, I was like, what is testing and what is violating the Constitution? That makes sense to testing the limits and versus like just like being like let's just say like yeah, I'm gonna murder like or bomb like this city or something like that as like the president. Like, what's testing the powers of limits and what's like overstepping, I guess.
Well, it is interesting that kind of distinction because some people would argue that the Trump administration isn't causing a constitutional crisis. They're not actively trying to flaunt the law, but they are testing it in every single direction.
Yeah.
And then they're seeing what sticks. Now, what you see with the Supreme Court is that they've basically ruled against them on a lot of different things, the ending of DEI programs, the like restricting of certain areas of aid, restricting, and things like that. And, you know, it's really Trump is breaking all these new grounds to basically see, where actually does executive power, what are the real limits to it, to a way that's never been done before. And I do think it's really interesting, though, that the way that our current system is set up, it's up to 9 people to really decide where that executive power ends.
Yeah.
It's very interesting.
Well, and, it is really up to those 9 people because I don't think in our lifetime, especially, unless some party figures out how to pick up a lot of seats, everybody will get amendments, and really help define the constitutional limits.
FDR did. We just need a Great Depression.
Yeah, hopefully
God
not.
bless you.
Hopefully not, hopefully not while we're in college, after college.
We'll see. The golden age of America breeds success and
stop,
success.
Stop. But, yeah, I mean, so it is really up to these 9 Supreme Court justices that will sit there we'll probably, we might only see a rotation of what? 10, 12?
Well, let's talk about it real quick. Trump got in
4.
That's 4 people. They're all pretty young.
Wait, 4?
It was Gorsuch, Kavanaugh,
Comey
Barrett. There's one more. 1 second.
But as you were saying,
no, wait. Now I want to know what the last one was.
I don't think it was.
Really? Was it only 3?
I think I might have.
Oh, 3?
Yeah, it was 3.
Oh, okay. Oh, it might. Okay, people are saying it could be 4 when Clarence Thomas might be out. And hey, judging by the way things are, he might get one more because which one? I think Sotomayor is having severe health complications with her diabetes.
I've not heard about this.
Like she's had diabetes for I don't know, for her entire life, or more recently she's got like gotten type 2, and it's been somewhat of an impediment on her health recently. To the point where I don't know, I think she's been missing certain hearings and stuff like that.
Oh, I'm not.
She's had to have stand-ins. So there is some question over how her health is right now, and how much longer she can be in the Supreme Court.
See, I watched this guy that did a as I love Kalshi bets, right?
Oh.
And they're talking about
all roads lead to Kalshi.
They all do, because every decision made in America is based on Kalshi because they want everyone to make their money. Trump's plan is to look at Kalshi's bets and where the money's the most at and make sure they hit.
He needs to make sure the Patriots are up.
And therefore, Vance, when he runs in 2028, can get just a
landslide.
They made me so much money. But what it was saying was, like, this guy had like ChatGPT was like, so like if I was this age and I had this type of diabetes, what's my health? And like ChatGPT's like, you pretty much would be fine. Then he had, if I was Sotomayor, what would give me any information about that? And he was like, you're gonna be, like, that person would be fine. This was months ago. And because there was a bet on how many Supreme Court justices Trump will appoint or how many changes will be.
Yeah, this is why I say it's not really likely, because I think Sotomayor is going to be fine. But I know that I've heard that occasionally she does get like flare-ups where she does have to miss for a bit, then she comes back and she's okay. It's like a little hit or miss.
Yeah.
Going back, what's another definition then of what a crisis is? Constitutional crisis.
Another definition is the Constitution's meaning is in question, which could allow for many different interpretations, leading experts to disagree about what it means or making it difficult or possible to address this. This was seen in the Great Depression and the Civil War, where it rests on a bunch of unsettled constitutional questions, and that was talking about the federal government's ability to control subjects on which the Constitution was silent about, like slavery, or how a state could join the Union, or it didn't say whether one could leave or how it would go about doing so. It took a war to solve this, of course.
Unfortunately.
Unfortunately. So that's kind of like the Civil War thing, where it's like oh, the Constitution doesn't say like how a state would join. The Constitution doesn't say if I can leave. And going back to high school, it was really interesting. Like our teacher would ask us, "Do you think the Confederate States of America would have the right to leave?" And nobody was saying that they had the right to leave, but they're like, well, nobody actually supported them, but they'd be like, well, the Declaration of Independence says this. If you're like not satisfied, you have the right to rebel. And he was like, yeah, but where's the Constitution? Because we don't get governed by the Declaration of Independence. Maybe it's like our spiritual brotherhood of our Constitution, but it's not what we're guided by and what we're led by. So
right, it only helps to contextualize and better interpret the Constitution. The same thing with the Federalist Papers. We're not guided by the Federalist Papers, but we use the Federalist Papers to better understand the Constitution, put it in its better context in order to better abide by the Constitution, the only thing that is binding. And I think this question also goes to the, like stuff like that is also, I think there's a lot of question of like the Constitution's allowing of, for example, certain areas of states to secede and join other states, or certain areas to secede and proclaim their own states. I don't think there are provisions anywhere about state secession or intra-secession, where like if one part of a state wants to join another, or if one part of a state just wants to unilaterally break off, I don't think there's any discussion on it.
Actually, there's been I don't know if there's a discussion, but
Greater Idaho.
Yes, that's what I was thinking about that. I was like, there's
the Greater Idaho movement.
They used that, but they used, I think, I don't know which laws abide by them, but they had to get like a high percentage vote to get rid of where they're from.
The western half.
Yeah.
Well, more than western half. So basically, for those who don't know about the Greater Idaho movement, I think it's hilarious because it makes Idaho look like it's sticking up the middle finger. Basically, so you have the state of Idaho, and right next to it, there's the state of Oregon. And Oregon, basically, for those who don't know, the West Coast is basically Liberalville. You got Portlandia and others. I really don't know a single other place in Oregon other than Portland.
Yeah, I don't know another place.
Just think of Portland, and that's enough of a conversation, right? And then basically, after you go like one county inland, after the Oregon, after the West Coast, it's basically like Republican, conservative, all throughout. Significantly poor, a lot more rural. And they basically say that the politics of Oregon are getting dominated by these West Coast cities elites, West Coast liberals, and we have the right to secede and join Idaho, which is Patriot land, God's country, unlike those heathens over at the West Coast. And there's always this question, this debate of whether they're going to do it, because there seems to be popular support on the West side for it. But at the same time, a lot of people argue against it because, well, they're a relatively poor area that gets a lot of subsidies from the rich western half of the rich western coast of Oregon. So whether it'll happen in our lifetime, maybe, but it's an interesting conversation.
Yeah. But then moving on to the next thing, to try to, really talk about this constitutional crisis is Constitution tells us what to do, but it's not politically feasible. What we saw in this, or what we see, was the first time this happened was in 1824. This was the House of Reps had to choose a president, and this was decided as very corrupt. It was the John Quincy Adams deal. I forgot what it was called. The scandal was called.
The what? Which one? Which
John
one?
Quincy Adams, and how he had the House of Reps vote for him, and he made a bunch of deals.
Oh, it was called the corrupt bargain.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
And so that John Quincy, there was a tie, or no, we got the 270.
Oh wait, the corrupt bargain was wait.
But yeah,
That was 1824.
John Quincy Adams versus Andrew Jackson.
Yes, that's the corrupt bargain. It was also the corrupt bargain also can be referred to the Compromise of 1877 and Gerald Ford's 1974 partner Richard Nixon. That's interesting. But this 1824 was the original, the corrupt bargain, to my understanding.
And none of them hit the requirement electoral college votes to win.
Yes, because there was 4 people running.
Yeah, and so because of that split, House of Reps had to pick the president, and the vice president had to be picked by the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
And the next time we saw this was with
Bush v. Gore.
Bush v. Gore. And
But we didn't have Congress solve it. Why was that, Trex?
Because
It would have undermined the legitimacy of the election.
It would have.
So basically what this is saying is that there's a constitutional crisis in the sense that the Constitution actually tells us what to do. There's a very clear outline of what we're supposed to do. But politically, it would not be viable because the people would not support it. They would not accept it. They wouldn't like it. I think a lot of people would be pissed off if the difference of a couple hundred votes in Florida led to the Congress basically saying, all right, nobody won. We'll take it from here. We'll vote. Don't worry about it, folks.
What was the Congress looking like in...
That's a great question. I have no clue.
I've actually never thought about what would happen in... that was 2000. Yeah. So what was the Congress makeup in 2000?
Check it out. The 107th Congress was from 2001 to 2000. Wait, hold on. It met from Washington to 2001, 2003. Let's see. The first session, the second session. Let's see.
Makeup.
Party summary. Wow. So it was we got to go October 25th, 2002 because that's before the election. November 4th is the election, right? Right. So November 7th. So November 4th is the number we go by.
Yeah.
So 49 Democrats, 49 Republicans, 1 independent in the Senate.
The Senate.
That's the Senate. I know. But the Senate votes for the vice president. The House of Representatives in September 28th for 2002. 208 Democrats, 223 Republicans.
So what's interesting is...
And 2 independents who caucus with each.
So
we could have had a split
presidency.
Yeah.
Really quick. But honestly, I feel like if it went to the Senate, the Democrats would have rather made a deal about passing a policy than like putting somebody in office as the vice president, because it would have just been
it would just been a
headache,
a mess. Yes, a headache.
It would have been such a headache.
No other word was going to be used there.
No, there's only so many. It would have been Bush League.
It would have been Bush League. Yeah,
presidency.
Our Bush League presidency.
You've been throwing that term on me a lot recently.
Yeah, I know. Anything that I consider subpar, I call Bush Leagues. It's great. It's one of my favorite terms. There's a lot of governments in the world that are basically Bush League governments. Let's put it that way. Anyways.
And so the fourth one, defined by the 538 polling, was institutions themselves fail. And this is kind of, the Constitution has a system of checks and balances that sets various branches against each other for the laudable purpose of containing tyranny. But sometimes this
doesn't work.
Yeah, and they clash against each other. For example, this was the type of constitutional crisis commentators were referring to when describing reports that border control, ICE, were members of the executive branch weren't following orders from the judicial branch. So they were like, well, you know what? I don't need to follow your things because I'm the executive. And it's really weird to me because when you have so many, not so many, but professors kind of open up this idea of like the Supreme Court was not supposed to really have power over or the power to be a Supreme Court. You kind of go, okay, it makes sense though that these aren't going to clash, but I don't know. It's pretty interesting seeing these like definitions, and yeah.
So I think we'll go through a few more examples really quickly, and then we'll basically ask: is Trump violating the Constitution? Is this a constitutional crisis? So after Abraham Lincoln, then there came FDR. We talked about FDR, did we?
Yeah, we talked about FDR. We talked about. We actually never talked about the internment camps, but
well, that's a whole nother. I
know, but those were I think decided as legal because they were. National security, as always talked about, gets over everything.
Yeah. And then also, I mean, there's even the question, a lot of people are pushing for FDR to declare martial law because of the Great Depression, not to restore order, but in order to get a grasp on the economy. And there's whole debates over whether or not martial law should be used in that fashion with economic issues. Afterwards got Richard Nixon. He basically used a light form of unitary executive theory to argue that executive privilege protected him from being basically having to hand over Watergate tapes. And the Supreme Court ended up rejecting this in U.S. v. Nixon, ruling that the executive power is not absolute. So kind of interesting because the Supreme Court now says that basically the executive is immune to all official acts, or for all his official acts. But then U.S. v. Nixon says that executive power is not absolute.
And I think the Trump law that you're talking about, the one that has a bunch of different definitions, I think we have to really see that one get defined and played out in the future to really criticize it or be happy with it.
Because official acts haven't been defined, but I think the way that it kind of is living right now is the same way that the Supreme Court defined porn, if you're familiar. And the way the Supreme Court defined porn was, I don't know how to explain it, but I know it when I see it. And actual way it was stated, by the way, not word for word, but basically.
And I think that's like a great example of trying to demonstrate also a constitutional crisis. Like in both cases, the porn case and also the presidential powers case, because Constitution doesn't say what to do, but they also are too vague as well. It's not politically feasible on that providing definitions. Mm-hmm. So it's like a great example of highlighting all four things. And that's we'll see where that goes. But the next time we also see talking about this was
Ronald Reagan.
We already kind of talked on this, but in 1980s, Reagan was able to remove certain executive
officials,
without congressional approval, because that's in his power. Mm-hmm. And then,
Bush is interesting.
I think you need to talk about Bush.
Okay, Bush is very interesting because Professor John Yoo, as I mentioned before, this is where unitary executive theory gets basically formalized as a coherent theory that basically, using the vesting clause, using the take care clause, using historical precedent, relying pretty heavily on Andrew Jackson, to be honest, basically saying, oh, we have the authority. And let's talk about it. Well, George Bush used signing statements to challenge congressional laws restricting executive power. So this was he was actually fighting back against historical restrictions of the legislature. He used the unitary executive theory to justify enhanced interrogation, torturing, by basically saying that this is all what needed to be done, and this was all per the Constitution. Not going even further, saying that the Constitution was not even applicable for individuals who are not U.S. citizens, who are adversaries. That's the main thing. Adversaries to the United States government who are also not on U.S. soil. He also used it to basically justify warrantless wiretapping and detaining enemy combatants without trial. All these things basically set the stage for, I think, a lot of what Trump is doing now. Now, a lot of the examples, such as warrantless wiretapping, advanced interrogation, pretty grotesque. But the underlying theory, was really set up here, and this theory has been utilized historically. It seems to be a lot by the Republican Party to do a lot of things that are possibly questioned.
Well, and also, it's what we know, and what we don't know.
Right.
But yeah, I mean,
and I think with that, it comes to Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And how has he been using unitary executive theory?
Well, what we see in, I hate to say Trump 1 and Trump 2, because when I first heard that, I was like, I don't like how
Great Return.
I don't know if I like that's our way of defining things. But
the Bronze Age versus the Golden Age.
True. A heroic age and Civ, all those things. But Donald Trump's first time was talking really light on a lot of, for when he was trying to fire a bunch of executive members in all these cabinet spots. And this was talking about Comey.
Yeah, Comey and the FBI. I think he fired him the day before he was eligible for like a pension upgrade or something.
Yeah.
Hilarious.
And then there was also
Robert Mueller.
He
attempted to fire him.
Yeah. And I think if I remember correctly, he was able to fire Mueller because the Supreme Court ruled with Trump that you're able to do that.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
And look it up.
Yeah. And then also in 2020 we had Scalia versus the CFPB, and that was also strengthening the vesting clause, which was, as we've been talking about, the kind of foundation for all executive theory. And so, yeah, and now we have the newest Trump case where he, as we talked about, official acts. And I think now we need to go on to just talking about, are we in a constitutional crisis?
Well, yeah, I think also let's talk about something real quickly. Is that a lot of his spending cuts to different government departments. Also, he did not fire Robert Mueller, to my understanding. He tried to, did not work. Then he said he never tried to because it didn't work out well for guys like Nixon. I hate the Nixon shade personally, but anyways, going back to it, there's a lot of arguments saying that his cutting for stuff like USAID, his firings of tens of thousands of employees, which to my understanding are not firings. We offered them severance packages. These people are leaving willingly, except for the DEI guys. I think he just hard cut them.
Yeah.
Which the Supreme Court I think has ruled against, that you can't just unilaterally do that. But yeah, I think there's also the question of whether or not by going into these departments, is he violating his executive boundaries?
And it depends.
It really does.
Well, and that's the thing. It's like, does having these people come in, like Doge, or going into USAID? Because I know Congress controls the purse, right? And that's been always my arguments when I talk about executive orders. Has been like, well, yeah, I don't think and I'm not trying to pick only on Biden. I think a lot of presidents have used executive orders to abuse their powers. I think Trump did this with the wall as well, using executive orders to get funding for certain things or pass certain policies. Like, the executive order to help college tuition under the Biden administration, and be like, we're actually gonna freeze it, or we're gonna suspend the debts. And I got struck down because the president doesn't control.
He doesn't control the money flow.
Yeah, it doesn't control the purse,
right?
As I've learned, and also Trump with the border wall. And so, to me, it's interesting because they're not increasing funding, they're not getting funding, they're suspending funding, which that is where I think it is under the constitutional vagueness. And yeah.
To my thinking of it, I don't think we're in a constitutional crisis now. Is Trump doing a lot of things that a lot of people aren't happy about? Yeah, every president does. That being said, I think the term constitutional crisis is a rather heavy term, and it's being used, I think, by a lot of, bad actors when it comes to politics. Now, what I do believe is happening is that Trump is testing the bounds of his executive power in every direction. He's taking unitary executive theory to the fullest. However, I do believe that unitary executive theory, regardless of your beliefs on it, is not completely unfounded. I think that there is a very strong legal argument for unitary executive theory. And does it have some questionable implications? Sure, well, you might not be happy about it, but that doesn't mean it violates the Constitution. That doesn't mean that it's unconstitutional. You just might think that the Constitution might need some reform. But as it stands right now, if what he's doing is abiding by the unitary executive theory, and I think it's maybe not, the most desirable theory, it's justifiably legal.
Yeah. I want to push back on this a little bit and maybe provide a new conversation to this. Is maybe is Trump there's formal and informal ways that he might be causing constitutional crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what we have to look at a presidency a lot. Now, I think in 2020, there's an argument during the January 6th that informally he was causing a constitutional crisis because it's not his presidential powers. He wasn't using any legal stuff, but informally he was causing a constitutional crisis because he was trying to influence the election outcome as perceived by some.
Uh-huh.
This is just me pushing back on you.
Yeah.
And then formally, he wasn't trying to do that in the federal government. Maybe talking about calling places and asking, hey, like the Secretary of State in Georgia to find votes, formally was a constitutional crisis because it was vague if he can do that or not. Does that make sense? Kind of like the informal and formal maybe distinction should be talked about as well when we're talking about the constitutional crisis. And as I'm saying this, when I'm using the term constitutional crisis, it's kind of hard because there's a bunch of different definitions. So I think we have to use the Constitution or the Supreme Court's definition of porn, when I see it.
Well, I think the question is is he fundamentally breaching the Constitution in a way that could manifest into bigger or larger breaches?
Yeah.
Because that's kind of how I understand the constitutional crisis. Like, can this breach fundamentally weaken, change the Constitution, harm it in such a way that it can manifest in things that get a lot worse? When it comes to the election, I'm agnostic to it all, to the exact degree that it was a constitutional crisis or whether or not it was whether or not, I don't know what to call it. Insurrection. It was a rebellion. I don't know what it was, a riot. Whether or not it was planned by Trump, whether or not it wasn't. What to the degree that it was, he's culpable for it. I'm agnostic towards it. That being said,
can we play in a hypothetical world really quickly?
Sure.
Because I do want to find a way where we can kind of find what a constitutional crisis like really is, and like if Trump's violating it. So I think we have to just go to the drastic and the extremes to get to it. And I think this is one of the best ways to do that. Let's say Trump on January 6th was like, yeah, guys, we're going in there. We need to go in there. I need you to break into the floor of the Congress. I think that would be in a hypothetical.
At what point is that a constitutional crisis? And the other point is just like, this is just a straight rebellion. Like, you know what I mean?
No,
like,
because that's what I'm saying.
Or is every rebellion a constitutional crisis? That's a good question.
And the Civil War.
Yeah.
I mean, we talked about that.
The Civil War was started off of a very strong disagreement over the Constitution.
And that's what I'm saying is like, I think as when people that think of the constitutional crisis, you need to, I like to always look at American politics or any government as there's formal and informal things. And I learned this in AP government. The president has formal rules, the ones that are listed, and informal rules that are typically traditions and things that the president's been allowed to do or kind of has the power to do, but doesn't say that.
Right.
And I think that's how you could define a lot of things in American politics very easily by informal and formal qualities.
I don't know. I think to me, it's more like the seen versus unseen, because I think a constitutional crisis or violating the Constitution is violating the Constitution. Yeah. Whether or not it's done through the formal mechanisms or the informal mechanisms, still breaching those separation of powers, breaching the exact rules that you're allowed or not allowed to do. It's all just a matter of the seen versus the unseen. Is it backroom dealings where, you want to conspire to weaken some branch? If you want to conspire to weaken the legislature, maybe you work with some of the people in the legislature to kind of weaken that branch.
So let me offer you this. Is it maybe not breaking a rule of the Constitution, or not informally breaking a rule, but maybe breaking the spirit? Like it's like instead of like, how there's the rule of the law and the spirit of the law.
Yeah.
Is it breaking the spirit of the Constitution maybe? Because I don't really know if Trump's breaking it. And also January 6th, I don't know if January 6th is like Trump's doing, and if that's the undermining of a constitutional crisis, because to me, there's informal and formal ways. And I think when you're breaking the Constitution and when you're saying a constitutional crisis, I think it has to be really direct. Like there has to be like A to B, like, the glove has to fit and say like, this is what happened to me.
I don't know. I think it is that the real constitutional crises that will slowly destroy this country are not the ones that we're going to be screaming and kicking about. I agree with Scalia. Things that will destroy and erode the Constitution, our republic, will be the wolves in sheep clothing. The things that seem not harmful at the beginning, but prove to be very pernicious and harmful in the long term. Those noxious gases which slowly build up until eventually you just pass out and die. To me, those are the real constitutional crises, the ones we don't see, the ones that we don't call out. I think the ones that we do call out, a lot of them are smoke and mirrors. Because if half the country knows and realizes it's a constitutional crisis, half the country is ready to just overturn it, set it back, or not abide by it. But it's the ones you don't realize, the ones you don't see, the one that gets set in the popular psyche. It's those constitutional crises that erode the Constitution that really are like a cancer that kills you from the inside.
Yeah. Do you think maybe I think national security a lot of times expands the Constitution, and not good ways and sometimes really great ways of helping it. But when we see national security be used, I think that's like the cancer you're talking about.
Well, yeah, I don't think our founding fathers wanted our NSA to be watching us on our phone cameras doing stuff. I think that's wrong. I don't think George Washington would have been cool with that.
Do you think George Washington would have allowed TikTok? Do you think he would have been like...
George Washington might have been confused as to why I think he would be more amazed at the concept of a phone in the first place.
Nah. He knew about a phone, bro. He was a founding father. He knew about the future, okay?
He'd probably be like, China, isn't that the place that's like low-key a backwater swamp with the monarchy on it?
China?
But,
what is that?
Yeah, like, you're telling how are they from across the world fleeing us here?
They didn't land in India like we did.
They don't even have a strong navy, bro. Like, how are they affecting us?
What are they doing?
But yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I just a quick conclusion, I guess. For me, like what did you think of a constitutional crisis? To me, I think constitutional crisis is like the term energy independence. It's so broad, nobody knows what it means. You'll have a definition, a person will have a definition, and you're both wrong because it doesn't mean anything.
Well, meanings don't anything. It's all subjective.
It's all subjective. It's all man-made.
It's not like it's like when people say X thing should be a right.
Yeah.
Like I think it was like Liechtenstein or Luxembourg. They in their constitution they said access to the internet is a human right or something like that, or is a right of the Liechtensteinians, right? And to me, it's like, I believe in civil rights. Like, if it's in the Constitution, you're beholden to it. But then I hate when people are just these wishy-washy things. Anything is, we have a right to this. We have a right to that. Anything that's nice, we have a right to it. And they just use this term as a catch-all to kind of be like, it's a right, therefore I have the moral high ground to argue for it. Yeah. But in reality, what you're doing is you're completely eroding the meaning of it. You're completely eroding the usage of it. You're making it a trite word that, like, eventually, but really just gets hackneyed. And it's like, eventually it's like, cool, constitutional crises. Cool. I feel like we've been through that continuously for the last 12 years. I remember all the during the Republicans during Obama, it was one constitutional crisis over another. He's destroying this country. They're ruining it. Then Biden, he's destroying this country. Trump, he's destroying this country. The Constitution, every single nothing ever happens. But then also at the same time, it's like all these catch-all buzz terms: rights, energy independence. Any one of these terms, constitutional crisis, that gets like thrown into like the popular media once they get like out of like the academic sphere, they just they're nonsense words, unfortunately.
Yeah. The most important election.
Yes. This is the most important election in US history. SNL did a great skit about this. It's a What's My Name skit. I definitely recommend watching it. I think it was John Mulaney was in there. Could be wrong.
Oh.
It was John Mulaney.
Yeah.
And I just recommend watching it. It was really, really funny. Do you like SNL, What's My Name? John Mulaney probably. It's hilarious. It's absolutely hilarious. That being said, Trex, thank you for coming on the podcast, and thank you for listening. Have a nice one. Thank you. This episode was brought to you by our producer, Miles Moorfield. This episode was also brought to you by the Ox Institute. For more information to keep up with them, follow them at oxinstitute.org. Thank you.